Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. My name is Cole Heilborn. Today, I'm sitting down with Tom Marino. He is the Senior Manager of Site Experience for Solomon North America. Tom, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Cole?
Doing great. Yeah, really well. I'm super excited to have you on the show and super excited to jump into our conversation. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to be here.
I'd love if you could give us a quick introduction. Where are you calling in from? How's your day going?
You bet. Yeah, I am in Ogden, Utah, which is about 45 minutes north of Salt Lake. We are the HQ for North America for the brand Solomon. And obviously there's a few sister brands under the Armor Sports portfolio, Atomic, Arc'teryx, etc., that have a few in place here as well.
Gotcha. And are things pretty busy these days coming up on the end of the year?
Yeah, it's Q4 push, holiday season, lots of inventory out in the market. It's going to be a pretty interesting Q4 in the old digital space.
So, Senior Manager of Site Experience, we've obviously had the chance to connect prior. I know a little bit about what that title means. I'd love if you could break down what exactly does that mean? What does your day-to-day look like? What do you get to work on?
Yeah, it's nice and vague, but what does it really mean? It's really the intersection of like site operations and digital product development. It's really thinking through how do we bring a physical product onto the website for the North American consumer, and then how are we building a website journey that's better for a consumer, whether they're coming for a more technical product or maybe it's a more comfort oriented or benefit driven product. That's really what we do.
Gotcha. And when you say you're at the intersection between, did you say design and like UX?
Yeah, so it's site operations on one side, so that's like putting up banners, putting up the catalog, all the like traditional site merchandising pieces, and then digital product development. So looking at, say, a search function or a cross-sell tool, maybe that's a third-party tool, maybe it's internally developed, and looking at how consumers are behaving with it, what kind of benefit is it driving to the business, and then looking at refining it as well.
Gotcha. And on a typical day-to-day, what are you working on? Are you coding? Are you designing things? Are you doing neither of those things?
No coding, a little bit of design, but more so in like the wireframe. So I might look at, say, designs or mock-ups with actual UX designers, user interface designers. Might be working with a product owner or product manager on talking about use cases, could be talking with engineers about chasing bugs that are happening, filing those tickets, working to flip switches in the back end to, say, put something live, but really looking at, site calendar. What are the things that are coming in the future? What are we prepping for? What are the visuals that we have? What is the copy that we're putting up? Getting all those pieces in place, and then obviously all the digital product stuff I just mentioned.
Gotcha. And what does the team breakdown look like? What does your team consist of, and what are the teams that you're working with look like?
Yeah, so the site experience team there's two other guys on my team. There is a site merchandiser, so visual specialist, if you will. And then there's a site operations / site optimization associate as well. And he's really focused on, what are the sort orders on our product listing pages? So if you go to men's shoes or women's shoes, what are the products in the order? What is the logic that we're using behind that? Is it automated? Are we pinning things? Maybe say we have a big campaign activation, putting that product specifically in the first spot, things like that. And then I also work in conjunction with our global product team. So there's a global merchandising team that works through creating larger campaign assets, something that is more, globally relevant, that we may be activating at the same time as our counterparts in EMEA. And then we also work with the digital product team, which is over there. And that is, again, looking through all of those different consumer journeys and what are the behaviors that we want to encourage better consumer journey behavior.
Interesting. So I feel like it's 2022. There's so many things to talk about when it comes to marketing and social media and branding and content and YouTube. But one thing that I don't hear a lot of people talking about is websites and, well, frankly, like kind of the backbone of a lot of that content. And which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to have you on the show, just to kind of dive into your world and some of the things that you're noticing and some of the things that maybe some people aren't aware of. when it comes to websites and optimizing them and increasing user flow and increasing consumer experience on them. I'm curious if you could take a step back and if you could define, like, what is the goal for Solomon with your website? Is there one goal? Are there multiple goals? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think when you look at like the consumer journey, it's all about what are they coming to your website for, right? There's so many digital touch points that are out there, social media, content pieces like YouTube, but really that end site is an education piece. There's obviously other retailer websites out there that can help do those things. So our goal is really to, and this has been established, I would say more so in the last year, and the way that we're refining the website is really build a sports specialist. We have a pretty wide catalog when it comes to playing outdoors. Obviously in North America, the brand is really well known. If you're a skier or a snowboarder or you cross country ski, if you're, say, a runner or maybe you're into sneakers, maybe you don't know about the brand as much. Maybe you're, a sneakerhead and you like the swoosh or you like the three stripes, and those are the brands that you're really into. The brand awareness there is a little bit different. So the consumer needs are going to be a little bit different than, say, consumers who already know what your products are. So it's really about, looking at how are we inspiring consumers when they come to the website. How do they understand what the brand is, and then understand the brand through that category lens. And there are different regional articulations for some of those things based on product preferences, with skiing probably being the most stark. So it's inspire, it's how do we guide people, like what are the right products for this consumer based on their persona. Are they a more committed athlete? Are they somebody that is out there training every day? Are they somebody out there, on the skin track every morning? What are their motivations? What are their needs? They probably know a little bit more about the products they want. Maybe it's a more technical specification that they're looking for. Or is it a more like, recreational type consumer? Or is it someone who is really looking for specific benefits to do a specific activity? Their motivations, their needs are different, right? It may be more benefits driven here, and it may be more technical driven there.
So you talk about articulation and variations in the website for users in regions and with seasons. What does that actually look like? Like if I go to the website today, how does that differ from 6 months from now?
I would say let's just start with the today and juxtaposing it with Europe versus the US. There are some pretty stark differences there. So skiing, as an example, may be really what would be called on-piste, right? So really resort-focused skiing. It's a more rental-oriented culture. Whereas in North America, the brand is really known for its free ride products. The QST, the stance lines, those are really what people are using to kind of ski all over the mountain, and the visuals that go along with that are different. So it may be a stance campaign, as an example, in the two regions, but the imagery that you're going to use to speak to those are going to be a little bit different, right? And maybe I'm skiing on a groomed run, maybe I'm skiing in chopped up crud. Same thing goes for trail running. It's really about where are you running on huge, aspiring peaks. The Alps is an insanely beautiful place. And there's great, amazing places here, but the trail running is a little bit different here as far as where you're going to go and what is more approachable. It's really thinking through those types of things. And then, your question about 6 months from now, it's really about seasonality, right? So making sure that you have imagery that matches the season with whatever you're using, right? So if I'm 6 months from now and it's the end of ski season, things are tailing down, maybe that's more spring skiing orientation, maybe it's touring, etc. And then on the trail run side, maybe it's a little bit warmer and it's not winter trail running.
How customized can you get with that? If I'm up here in the Northwest, could you, if I go to the website today, can you show me only ski products? But if I was living in Arizona, maybe you would only be showing me trail running products today. Is that possible?
The way that our site is set up today, no, there are definitely tools out there that allow you to personalize based on those things. I would say it's definitely something we're exploring, but the sexy stuff, the personalization, things like that, they're really, really hard, and you have to have a lot of the fundamentals in place for that to matter. So product information management systems, photo management systems, content management systems, all those things have to be in place, and then you have to be very good about curating the recipes, if you will, about, okay, what am I actually targeting, and is this consumer in Arizona actually looking for trail running gear, or maybe they're actually a skier that's looking to go on a vacation. So you have to understand those two pieces, and And really, I mean, it's like a retail store. You have to have the fundamentals in place when they walk in to at least understand, okay, that category is there, this category is there.
It seems like a lot of if-then statements.
Oh yes,
like hundreds, thousands of them.
Yeah, it can get pretty out of control for sure.
So I'm curious. I look back at the early 2000s, and websites for a while were kind of a nice to have, but maybe not a need to have. Or at least that was some people's perspectives. And obviously, they're here and they're not going anywhere. I'm curious, what does the future of website mean to you, and how does that fit into kind of the equation of the company and their marketing?
Yeah, cool. That's a good question. I think when you look at what are consumers interested in, it's what do they use a website for, right? Maybe they're coming to your website because they saw something inspirational on social media or through a marketing campaign. Maybe they're already members of your mail list, and they're coming via that way. How am I inspiring them through that first page? I was going to mention this a little bit later, but when you think about where you come on the website, it's never just to the homepage. If you think about the ways that people get there, so rough metrics usually across most sites, and this varies, but about 30% come to the homepage, 30% come to like a listing page, which would be a category page like trail running shoes or something like that. A third come to a product detail page, so looking at a specific shoe. So let's say the Ultra Glide from Solomon as an example. And those can all have different touch points, whether it's CRM, email list, text message, maybe it's a social media post. And then the last little remainder really comes through, higher search intent content pages, right? So if you run a Google search for, how to trail run shoes, or how to trail run, or how to buy trail running shoes, or what are the things that I need in trail running shoes, there's content out there that is optimized to kind of meet those search terms, and there's different search volumes for each of them. So those are really the ways, and it's really, again, understanding what are those consumer needs, what are your consumer personas for your website, and what are the things that I'm doing to meet those needs. Again, like, how am I providing inspiration? How am I providing the guidance once I have kind of set that hook in? And maybe that inspiration came offsite, and now I'm fully into a guidance mode. So it's benefits, it's tech specs, it's features. Those are really the key things, and really creating that immersive experience that helps a consumer imagine themselves using that product. Maybe I'm going on a hike out in Colorado, and it's using that imagery that helps them say, oh, you know what, I could actually be that person on that mountain.
So when you think about all the different ways that people find themselves at your website, and you think about all the different motivations as you're describing, have you guys gone through and mapped out, here's the top 100 ways that people arrive at our site and what they're looking for, and then that starts to dictate how you build the site?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we absolutely have gone through, and it's, I would say, pretty standard for all those different pieces. The specific pages, the specific types of pages, that's always going to be dynamic and fluctuate based on whatever the trends are, whatever the activations are within a given period. So we understand those consumer journeys. Where I'd say our biggest work over the next couple of years is how do we go through those journeys, those core journeys, and make it a more optimized experience? How are we addressing consumers' needs? How are we suggesting, once they've committed to the right product, how are we suggesting the right other products that are within our catalog that might improve their experience as well? How do we make sure that they know these are the things that you need to go do this if you're, say, a more recreational type persona, to here are the things that our premier athletes, our Francois DeHanes, our Courtney DeWalters, our Cody Townsends, here are the products that they use to do all the amazing things that they do, and really talking to those personas in a different way, but making sure that the journey is consistent, recognizable, and doesn't feel forced.
Why is it important that the journey feels consistent and not forced?
Well, the not forced thing is an immediate turnoff, right? Let's use a retail store as an example. If I walk into a retail store and the first thing that they're doing is trying to sell me something, they don't necessarily know that I'm actually there to purchase something. Maybe I'm there to look around and get intelligence about maybe, say, a specific product, or I want to educate myself about what are the things that I need, but I'm not really ready to purchase today. So that's how a forced interaction can push you right out of that funnel. I saw a post recently about retail shops on LinkedIn, and about how consumers are coming in and they want to get fit, and then they're on their phone shopping while they're doing it, and then they'll go purchase elsewhere. In e-commerce world, that same thing exists. It's called bounce rate, it's called exit rate, and it's basically they're coming to the website, they're doing some intelligence gathering, and they may buy from you, they may buy from somewhere else. Solomon as a brand has so many points of distribution, right? There's retail stores, whether that's a independent retailer, it's a larger chain to obviously our website. And at the end of the day, the consumer is going to choose based on their needs and preferences. Maybe that's convenience, maybe that's education, maybe that's some sort of loyalty program, maybe that's some sort of affinity for the education they've got. If you look at independent retailers, some of the things that they are best at is educating a consumer about a specific product or about a specific category, right? We'll use boot fitting as the example. The story that I mentioned earlier was about people coming in and charging them for that time. That's, you're putting a friction point to just come in and actually get that education, as opposed to leaning into your experience, say, and building some sort of loyalty, some sort of trust, and standing behind your experience and your education to use that as a benefit versus a friction point, if that makes sense.
So how do you feel about a pop-up ad asking me to subscribe to your email list when I first log into the website?
Not my area, but is my area. Not my favorite thing, if I'm being totally honest. It is absolutely an important way to acquire new users to your email list. It also means that people are going to sign up. I mean, I do this on other people's websites. I'm sure you do as well. Sign up with whatever made up email you have just to get that discount to make that first time purchase, right? So that's not really building true loyalty. It's basically just saying you can have a discount of always this when you come to shop at our store. That is going to happen at retail stores as well, right? You're going to walk into a shop and you say, okay, I want this pair of trail running shoes, and maybe I'm going to have a top and a bottom, and you can ask for, say, 10% discount, or maybe even the sales ask for a 10% discount. It's kind of the same kind of concept. That being said, when you pop up an interstitial like that, it does break the consumer's mindset about what they are actually trying to do on your website. It's like, oh, here, look at me. Now I'm going into this funnel. What was I here for? And sometimes that can create problems as well. So they're a necessary evil, but there are other ways to work through that. So we actually just launched our loyalty program called S+. And I imagine as we grow that program, we will see less and less of the pop-ups on our website when we first land.
I appreciate that. So when you think about, I'm really intrigued, but you keep using the word flow and keep talking about how consumers flow through the website. Are there any specific examples that you could give of either design elements or UI elements that inhibit flow? Anything that you've seen with your time at the company or just throughout the industry?
Let's use Amazon as an example of a really good flow state. When you go to Amazon, how do you find a product?
I search for it.
Yeah, exactly. So what they've done is they've made search hyper primary in their shopping experience, whether you're on the website or you're on the mobile app, which are slightly different experiences, but basically blended to be the same thing. And that's getting back to that kind of consistency. But they have made sure that based on your intent, you are able to find what you need. And then the other thing, like, what is the other reason that you probably shop at Amazon?
Research, trying to figure something out.
Okay. And then what would be one past that? After you've committed to the order.
Price comparison.
And what's one more? What's the thing that Amazon is best at?
I feel like an idiot for not having your answer.
No, that's okay. It's logistics. It's really about, when I place this order, I know that the product is going to be at my doorstep most likely within 2 days, and sometimes within a day, and sometimes even the same day. I was ordering coffee not that long ago, ordered it on a Saturday morning at like 10 a.m., and it was literally at my door by like 2 p.m., which is insane. but that is how good they are at predicting and distribution, but also making sure that last mile distribution to your house is really, really buttoned up. So it's building in that confidence level so that when I search for the product and I've found what I need, maybe I'm comparing things, I also don't even think about how long is this going to take to get there or when is it going to be there. It's just not even part of the consideration journey because that trust is built in.
So now you've got me thinking about the times I've spent on Amazon and how they're keeping me focused. If I use this as an example in a previous episode, but I've recently bought a new mic for the podcast, and I went to Amazon looking for a mic, knowing which mic I wanted to get, and I found it. I was ready to click buy, and then I noticed that I could, there's that little tab that pops up at the bottom. It's like, oh, if you're buying this, you might also want this, and that gives like 2 or 3 other options. And one of them was like a boom arm for the microphone, and I was like, oh shoot, well I obviously need one of those. So I ended up purchasing it, and now I'm using it today. But I'm thinking about the importance of flow, and I went there for a microphone, and only after I found the microphone did it suggest something else to complement my purchase. Had I gone to Amazon first, looked for the microphone, and then it started throwing me other products that were peripheral products that could help me, I feel like that might have disrupted me, and it might have gotten me distracted from my intent.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so recommendations is really surfacing those at the right time is a good example. So we just re-platformed our website. That's what I actually was signed up with Solomon to do, is essentially help us re-platform from an old instance of Magento to a new instance of Magento. I came in pretty late in the process during what's called UAT, user acceptance training, basically learning some new systems. They built some internal tools for all brands to kind of manage their catalogs, and then each website is tailored and has a little bit different needs, again, addressing different consumer needs. Wilson, as an example, obviously has a whole team orientation in the way that they're selling products, so kind of bulk orders, if you will. So, sorry, what was the question? I lost my train of thought there.
No, you were talking about flow and what you've been brought in to do recently for Solomon.
Great. Yeah, so Wilson they have these team sales, right? And that is a different orientation. So we have the ability to curate the experience while having some common tools on the back end that allow the portfolio to have some consistency and efficiencies on the back end, or synergies, if you will. And what we're really doing is trying to understand, through going back again to that sports specialist, what are those different pieces for each of those? What are the target personas by region that we're trying to tailor the website to? And then add those little pieces without, again, it feeling forced. So that's your pop-up example, or a bad recommendation example, and something that's natural, which is like your boom arm example. If you look at the way that the website is today, we are working through optimizing those pieces. So we have a cross-sell module on our product detail pages. A really good example is we had 2 modules. One was a cross-sell, so we called it Complete the Look. This would be products you would buy with a similar thing. When we first re-platformed the website, that was at the top of our PDP. Probably the most common best practice and what consumers are really looking for is a comparison. Because of this product that I'm looking at, what are other like products that I might be interested in? So we A/B tested that, which is called a multivariate test. We had, I think it was 2 different variants, basically flip-flopping those 2 pieces, and the one that had the better results, add to cart rate, conversion rate, etc., was actually the similar product. So we made that change based on the things that we saw across the regions, across volumes, and the metrics that we were really looking for to try and increase that. So the next phase of that is like, what are the recommendations across those sports specialties that you're adding to, again, make it less forced and really feel like you're a specialist.
Can you share what some of the findings were between your A/B testing that made you decide to go one direction or the other?
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics as far as what the rates were, but the number that jumps out to me is we saw about a 20% lift in add to cart rate. So when you had that similar product, you had a higher percentage of people adding those products to cart from that product detail page, not necessarily from those similar products, but your add to cart rate increased on those pages.
Huh. Interesting. What about color? Does color play a role in flow and the user's experience and preventing roadblocks?
Depends. Let me ask a qualifying question. What type of color are you talking about? Are you talking about product color? Are you talking about banners? Are you talking about buttons?
Yeah, everything on the site. So other than colors of product, but if I'm, we're looking at a user interface right now that's kind of a gray scale, and I don't know, to me it feels inviting and easy to use. But if this was a orange screen, I might feel a little antsy or anxious right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say overall design aesthetics, each it should match whatever your brand, archetype or persona is. So that is a way to make a consumer who is coming back to you feel that kind of consistency. So there's that design piece, and there can be different design components that sit behind that. Maybe that's your typeface that you're using across different points of the website. So different font types. To different banner colors. So I'll use the drop-down menu as an example. We typically will have those in black, but let's say we want to emphasize something in a given period. Maybe it's a sale, maybe it's a specific thing like a shoe finder or something like that. We can change the color of pieces like that, and you will see an increase in those click-through rates on items like that. So it does play a point. The thing you have to be careful about with color, we'll use product listing page as an example, right? So I'm looking at a bunch of shoes. If black, your best seller, and all of those shoes is the primary color, you're literally looking at a wall of black shoes. Is that the best orientation or presentation of the brand? Probably not. So there has to be some curation of that. Sometimes it can be automated. Again, sometimes it can be manual and site merchandiser discretion, or based on campaign activation, etc. Maybe you want to match the specific products to a specific banner that you have on that page for an activation that you're running.
So, all right, I'm taking a step back a little bit. Earlier you were talking about the similarities between a website and a retail store, and you've used this analogy a couple of times. Is that how you think about a website?
Me personally, yes. I worked in a store for 8 years, so I started, well, let me step back there. I've worked in retail for about 10 years, about a decade. I spent 8 of those years at Evo. I started Evo in Seattle. I started in 06 there when its store started in 05, so I started in the receiving and worked my way up through boot fitting and ski sales and management for about 8 years. For me, it is a natural orientation. So going back to the recommendation analogy that I gave you, that support specialist, that independent retailer who's really good at products, as soon as I've got that customer committed, especially if they're a really good shop with a sales training program, service training behind it that can help back it up, they're going to talk about all of the things. Let's say I'm buying a ski set. I've already committed to boots. Now I'm recommending, okay, these are the other skis and bindings that you might like with it. And guess what? We also have this service program where if you buy all 3 items, you're going to get the mounting for free, and that's an X dollar value, etc. So being able to articulate in a similar way for their website, you're addressing the same consumer needs. You may not, say, be able to do the service online, at least today. And honestly, I don't know in the future. I feel like that is honestly best served at retail by someone who is hands-on every single day. You have to address those consumer needs in a similar way. You have to be able to recommend the right products. It's the same orientation. It's the same consumer journey, if you will. It's just done in a physical space versus a digital space.
So obviously, one challenge of the digital space is helping customers bridge that gap of not being able to touch and feel a product or try it on. How do you overcome that? And are there pieces of technology that are being developed that could help with that in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a pretty wide open topic. I would say the short today is AR. That's probably the most consistent thing. I'll use sunglasses as a really good example. So if you go to Oakley's website, you go to various different websites, you're going to be able to actually just press a button on your phone, and you're going to be able to try it on digitally with relatively good accuracy. There's different providers that do different orientations and different versions of it, so you want to make sure that feels as natural as possible. Obviously, this is commonplace in social media, whether that's your Instagrams, TikToks, your Snaps, etc. Really thinking through how do I make it feel like I'm actually not in a digital space, but I'm in a physical space? So that's one example. The other example that I've seen out there, and something I was exploring when I was at Evo, so we created a program called Evo Fit. So I moved from retail management for 8 years, kind of hit a roadblock in my progression, and joined the buying team. So I wrote a proposal, which is, I was pretty naive when I wrote this proposal, but like asked the founder out to coffee. We sat down, we talked about it, and then I was brought on as an assistant buyer, took over the water sports category, and then eventually led into ski and helped launch Serve. But as I was managing the retail store, we built a consistent kind of boot fitting program, and this was just when the store was in Seattle. But then we built this consistent program. We called it Evo Fit once I moved into the buying, and it was really about educating the consumer. We'll guarantee your fit. We're going to do some of the service work for free, but you need to buy these 3 critical items. The first is the boot, making sure that boot fits you. And when I say a boot fits you, there's different factors that go into it, right? It's what is the shape, what is the flex, what are your motivations? Price is absolutely a factor. So Evo obviously offers different things from past seasons that allowed people to get maybe a boot that fits the same as a current one, but at a discounted rate. And different options there. So fit was, we trained up the staff to make sure that we have that. The second component was a footbed. We want to make sure your foot is in a consistent space each time. We want to make sure it's supported. And then the third is a sock. We want to make sure you're not putting on this huge thick wool sock that completely changes the way that your boot fits. So if you bought those 3 components, we would stand behind it with a fit guarantee, and there were different versions of it. And it's kind of been, I would say, streamlined for faster selling, because Evo sells a lot of boots in the winter. In the time that we were developing that program, I was looking at other options out there. How do we take that physical experience and merge it with the digital experience? There's a lot of different versions out there. There are companies that scan your feet, but none of them that usually use this, which pretty much everybody has, in a way that makes it super obvious. So the blue sky vision was to take actual boot dimensions. Think of this, I was at a retailer, so trying to get those boot dimensions across all the different brands was very hard. But then what are your physical dimensions? And then what are your consumer needs? And you use those 3 kind of components to help provide them a recommendation, which is literally what you're doing in that retail space, but you're bringing it. The technology at the time, specifically the cameras for the mobile devices, weren't there, but there are some companies out there that do some things like this. Nobody has quite found the right thing. I would not be surprised if there is something out there today where this is done at least at a vertical level, meaning it's a brand where they are giving you specific dimensions. You scan yourself, maybe it's apparel, maybe it's shoes, etc. And then they're giving you different recommendations. There's another couple of companies out there that do recommendations based on essentially conversions for people with products that look like you, and I would say that's probably the most common thing that I've seen out there. The problem with that is there are differences in the fit. So ski boots, as an example specifically, yeah, on average, that may be, your foot may be similar to them, but to get the true kind of right fit, it doesn't necessarily mean that your foot is going to fit well in that. So really the blue sky there is, how do I take the physical dimensions of both the product and the person and understand their motivations? What are the preferences that I listed off earlier, and give the right product recommendation based on that.
About a year ago, I was looking at a tent on REI, and you're talking about the AR. I could pop the tent up in my living room and walk around it.
All the furniture websites do that. Amazon actually has this on quite a few product pages as well for furniture, etc. Like, I would say the AR, see it in your spot. Home Depot does this as well. This is random, but I was looking at a flange for a toilet the other day, and if I wanted to look at the toilet flange in my bathroom, I could look at the toilet flange, which is, I don't know who's doing that, but it's definitely a possibility that you can do.
So this, if I'm using an AR tool, and let's say I'm an average consumer, I realize this is probably very dependent upon the individual who's using that tool. How much does that help me? How much does that increase my confidence in the purchase if I'm looking at the tent in my living room? Is it 10%, 50%?
I mean, it depends on the person, is what I would say, and it depends on what their motivations are. AR, at the end of the day, is going to be a very aesthetic-driven thing. I mentioned earlier, like people trying to place themselves using that product. It's essentially the same thing, but in a slightly different orientation, in a slightly different way. So it's going to depend on what is the accuracy of said thing in said space, and if it is a high level, so I'll use 3D spin, which is something we've been testing on the website. It's actually a pretty high increase, depending on the product, depending on the type of user, where you will see, say a 50% increase to add to cart. Now, that's on one specific product and a few specific colors. So is that true across the whole product catalog? That is a different conversation. But those can have pretty high confidence builders because you're able to touch and feel it, if you will.
All right, so with skiing, well, with any sport really, some people want to make sure that their kit is on brand. It matches their personality, the color schemes match. And if you're buying a top and a bottom, sometimes you don't know if those two will mesh well if you're just looking at pictures of them. Could I take a photo of me on a ski hill wearing the existing kit, upload it to a site, it then swaps out the products that I'm looking at for the products that I'm currently wearing, and then I could see myself in that kit in the environment that I would be in? Is that a possibility?
I mean, anything's a possibility, what I would say, right? That's the first thing, and kind of the rule of development. It's really how much does it cost, and what is the return you're going to get on the time and money that you're sinking into developing that, and what are the metrics that you're actually looking to move? What is the outcome that you're really looking for? So if you think of it through that lens, yeah, you could absolutely do it. But what is the total addressable market where people can do this? For a brand that's just selling, say, ski outerwear, we'll use Solomon as an example. The total addressable market is pretty small when you compare it to the total addressable market for people that wear shoes. There's 330 million people roughly in the U.S. Pretty much all of them have at least one pair of shoes, I would say, on average. That's a pretty fair baseline. People like myself who work at a shoe company may have a little bit more than that. But how many of those people actually have tech wear outer sets that they're actually going to go skiing with? It's a much smaller percentage. I want to say between skiing and snowboarding, I haven't seen any data on this, but it was around 12 million people roughly in the U.S. That's a fraction of what is actually available for the total addressable market in the U.S. So differences there, and being able to do that are harder. I think from an AR perspective, personally for me, that doesn't feel like that good of a use case. I've seen some examples, some of the more D2C oriented brands that have really popped up the last couple of years in social media, where they will essentially have a kit builder where you can essentially swap a jacket and a pant back and forth and look at the different kits. That basically takes really consistent photo imagery, so high intent with how I'm going to do that, shooting those photos for a specific end product. And when I say product, I mean an experience online, an interface that someone can interact and have a better visual.
What about VR? Does that play a role in any of this?
I'm not big into metaverse. NFTs is the first thing I would say. I definitely, Nintendo, what was it called? Virtual Boy, I think is what it was called back in the day. So I've definitely been around the virtual experience for a long time from a kid. That, for me, at least for the outdoor industry, feels like a tough sell. We want to be outdoors more, on our screens less. We're on a screen right now. I think both of us would probably rather be skiing right now, is a decent example. So I think when you think through VR, what is, again, the consumer needs that you're actually trying to address there? Is it actually being able to place myself in that experience? So from a marketing perspective, I think if I could throw on a VR headset and go watch Cody Townsend ski down a line, that actually, to me, is kind of interesting. But it's really about inspiration there. I don't really care about what products he's on. I don't really care about actually going and buying it right after it. I just want to experience what he's experiencing.
Sure. So because of the seat that you have and the intersection that you work with a variety of different folks all trying to accomplish similar goals. I'm curious, when you're working with someone in the marketing department, what are some of the challenges or what are some of the opportunities that exist when you're collaborating with someone from that department as you're trying to bring a product page or some sort of a site to fruition?
Yeah, I would actually start at just the overall business model. So Solomon as a brand has been wholesale since its inception within North America. We've been doing D2C a little over 10 years now, but not all categories. Winter sports equipment is a more recent addition where we've been selling snowboards for a while direct to consumer, but skis and Nordic you can find. There's big supply chain challenges within that, so what's available today is a bit of a challenge and hodgepodge in what's available. But because of that, it's not necessarily that the business was built with D2C in mind. So I would say that's overall the biggest challenge is you've essentially, this is a bad analogy, but bolted on a D2C business to a wholesale infrastructure. So there's a lot of what I would consider, Evo I think probably spoiled me in a lot of ways where they had a lot of internally built purpose-driven tools that really helped them shine as a retailer, whether that was the site merchandising that they had. Even I'll go to just the retail example. Probably my first introduction to product development was I was in the receiving role at Evo at the time in the retail store, and one of our developers at the time, who's also from Idaho, which is where I grew up, so we kind of bonded on that. I was telling him the way I have to print stickers to put a barcode and a price on every individual thing is I have to hand key in every single line and hand key in the quantity, and because their interface was so bad, if I made a mistake in that process, I had to start all the way over. And that could be like an 80-line thing. So it was actually super easy to make those mistakes. You get pulled away to do something, and I don't even know where I am anymore. So we had this conversation. I kind of showed him 5 minutes of what my process was. He came back the next day, and he's like, hey, try this out. And I basically pressed a button, and from the receipt that I input into our receiving system, the stickers automatically printed the exact quantities that I needed, and it saved me, I don't even know how many hours of my personal life he saved me, but I was like, oh, so that's what product development is. So Evo had those kind of purpose-built tools, obviously gave you that story. If you look at the way our business is, there are a bunch of different iterations and a bunch of different pieces with that. Probably the biggest juxtaposition that I would say for Evo versus a brand like Solomon is Evo's talking about a bunch of different brands, and they're talking about products. They're talking about stories within said products across said brands. Maybe that's their own story. Maybe it's a story that the brands are pushing. Sometimes those align, sometimes those don't. With Solomon, it's kind of the same thing, but through a more product-oriented lens. There is storytelling that can happen. Maybe it's a tech story. Maybe it's an initiative like WMN. Maybe it's an initiative like sustainability. And those are things that you can weave through different stories. But a lot of times, and this has been really insightful for me to see, is within a brand, you have a very specific kind of set activation window, if you will. And really you're thinking about trying to maximize that demand within that window versus necessarily selling over a season. So it's much more like a spike that then tapers down, whereas a retailer may have a more kind of even keel across that specific product as an example. Yeah. So because of that, on the marketing side, I think with e-commerce, websites don't shut off, right? And working with our brand team to educate them on how do we come back to that and tell that story again and again throughout the season, because consumers don't come to the same website every single day. They may not even come the same week. They may not even come the same month. So how many times can I surface this without it feeling inauthentic or forced or repetitive?
So how do you do that? How do you think through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The first thing is we built standards, right? So when I started, I would say it was a really small team, and we've kind of reshifted. The global team plays a component with it, specifically on kind of merchandising best practices. They help build campaign banners, etc. Give us guidance on different various things. But we really put in place more site calendars and then processes for how do we bring a product online for, say, a specific kind of high heat event. How do we do different pieces on the website, but really working with those brand managers on, say, a seasonal calendar for their categories. What are the things that we should be talking about in any given month? some categories may only have 2 to 4 months filled in with a specific product activation, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about their category especially from an investment standpoint. What are the things that we want to talk about that help show us as a sports specialist throughout an entire season, right? Skis, snowboards, Nordic, maybe a tighter actual end consumer usage window, but those categories live on the website at all times. So just as an example.
Interesting. Is there anything that folks who might be listening to this episode, a lot of people are in kind of your classic marketing positions, anything that they should be aware of that you come across frequently in the position that you sit in? Any best practices or kind of rules of thumb or just good advice when working with someone like you?
Yeah, I think consistent communication and alignment. I think this comes down to your site merchandising managers, your digital product managers, really understanding what their needs are as a stakeholder within the business. That's actually the first step. So it's actually on the site merchandising teams to ask about that, because a brand manager, as an example, is thinking across all points of distribution within a given region, right? And the website is one component of it. Maybe a priority, maybe not, depending on the category, depending on the brand, etc. But really making sure that there's clear alignment on who are the consumers you're targeting for that category. What is the operating best practices that we have for managing our calendar that helps inform what's happening on the website? And where I see probably the most consistent friction, honestly, is really not enough emphasis being focused on the creative brief for, say, a campaign. What are the visuals that I need? What are the aesthetics that we need? Because after those are produced, you're playing catch up to try and figure out, okay, I need to tweak this a little bit differently, or this doesn't quite meet my needs. So making sure that everybody's hyper aligned on that creative brief before it goes in across whatever those digital touch points are is super, super important.
So in a perfect world, would you want to see a creative brief before a campaign is put together to weigh input?
I think it depends on the scale, right? I don't need to see every creative brief, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I, as a site merchandising manager, need to see it. Maybe it's just our visual specialist needs to do a check off to make sure we're shooting and we have a horizontal banner or a horizontal photo orientation if they were only thinking about social, which may be more vertical. So making sure that we have those little touch points and check offs are super important. Yeah, so I would say it depends. It depends on the scale. I'll use seasonal gift guides as a very current example where, again, going back to those alpine differences, right? It's on piste in Europe, and it's free ride oriented in North America. Looking at making sure that creative brief has the ability for either 2 deliverables that has both those images, or the ability to quickly change them, but it's understood up front, as opposed to maybe during the process of those banner generations.
Interesting. So you're starting to get into my world a little bit, and now you're making me wonder. I wonder if we can encourage folks to, we get a creative brief and we assume that it's good to go and all stakeholders have signed off on it. Maybe we could suggest that folks maybe take a deeper dive into their organization if it seems like a project that is going to be touching multiple different components.
Yeah, understanding how, like, a shoot's expensive, right? I'm sure the quotes are not cheap, and obviously that's going to vary by different production sizes, etc. But you're investing the time and effort. You better understand what are my endpoints of distribution where I want this content to be digested. If the website's not part of it, that's fine. That is a brand choice that they can make, but they should still understand, is this social? Is it, let's use this podcast as an example, right? It's a long form, but what are the things that I can chop up within that to use as digital distribution at any given point? So those are key things for marketers to think about.
Well, just as it's important for you to understand what are customers coming to the website looking to experience, what are they looking to find? I mean, it's the same thing when thinking about content. It's where is it going to live? Who's interacting with it? What are their goals? What are we trying to solve? I think everything in life generally comes back to what is the goal and who are we talking to? So we're coming up close on the end of our time for today. I've this has been super interesting because it's not a perspective that we have a lot of on the show, and I love kind of how we've got a little bit into the weeds of how you think about a site. I've got a few last questions for you, but before I run through those, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you think is important to talk about?
I would say the other thing that I would consider that it's so easy to forget is we're talking on laptops right now, right? Your desktop orientation. When you're designing the site or designing a campaign, you have to think about this as your first point of entry for whatever that campaign is. Like the interfaces are different. There's many more interfaces from specific screen sizes, etc. And you have to understand, again, what is that endpoint of receipt of that content that I'm receiving, and how am I going to get to where I'm going to go? So thinking mobile first is definitely a suggestion I have for everybody. I'm guilty of this. It's so easy in designing, say, a product for the website to think about, okay, this is the orientation on desktop because that's literally what I'm working in. But my end consumer is probably going to first touch this through the mobile experience. So how do I make that so that when they do go to desktop and they want to convert, I can do that, or make it super easy to convert right there on the mobile device?
Yeah, no kidding. What brands are currently blowing your mind in terms of their design from a site? And these could be in the industry or outside the outdoor industry.
For sure. I would say outside the industry in particular, if you look at product detail pages, there's basically two types and two companies. So Apple and DJI do a really good job of having a good balance of these campaign type product detail pages that meet consumer benefit needs for a more enthusiast user, or they might have something that is extremely technical in what you're looking for, right? So DJI, as an example, has so many different examples, and I know I'm speaking your world, of these are all the specs, and they know who their end consumer matters, who that matters, what are the specs they're looking for. That translates to, obviously for us, let's use a road running shoe, maybe it's weight and maybe it's stack height as an example. Apple does the same thing, and I think what I really like about Apple is they make it super immersive. DJI does this as well, but what I really like about Apple is, let's take a MacBook Pro and let's take an iPad. The end users of those are two different things. For the MacBook Pro, they know that there's a bunch of people using it based on benefits or status, etc. But their pro user is who they're really targeting there, and everything else is kind of a trickle down. So they're making sure that the tech specs, they're leading more so there. I was just looking at an iPad PDP yesterday, which is highly conversion oriented, but then their campaign version of it is very immersive and very, I would say, much more benefit driven. They still have all the tech specs there for the people that want to look at it, but it is not as technically oriented from a lead perspective as your, say, MacBook Pro.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, you go to an Apple website and I'm looking at a product. It's a totally, I mean, to use your word, it's a totally immersive experience. You kind of get sucked in. There's that parallax effect as you scroll down, and there's like subtle animation that's happening. There's a lot of hours that went into designing that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the benefit of an Apple catalog is they're 20% of SKUs that are doing 80% of the business. Their models are maybe 12 to, let's call it 50 wide. It's not a super wide catalog where you may have thousands of SKUs at a brand, or say a retail. Let's use REI as an example, has probably, I wouldn't be surprised if they have several hundreds of thousands, if not a million plus SKUs with all the little different maps and things that they have. So becomes a much different experience. And again, understanding for whether that's the retailer or the brand, what are my end consumers, who are my target consumers, and how am I building a website that gives them the experience that they're expecting from me.
Yeah. All right, last couple just quick questions for you to wrap up. If I don't accept cookies on a website, how much does that affect you and your ability to do your job?
This is actually a really interesting one, because in EMEA, in Europe, the cookie acceptance rate is much, much lower, right? So your ability to personalize and understand who they are is much, much lower. Apple, as an example, releasing cookie blocking essentially within their iOS massively changed the way that people are able to serve targeted ads, or targeted even experiences. So I don't have a number for you, but it definitely affects it. It's an interesting thing when you think about just how we have been trained as consumers to just kind of click that box. We can use the App Store as the first kind of vector for that, right? Who is going to sit there and read a terms of service or terms agreement? Like, I know you don't, I know I don't. I would be highly surprised if anyone outside of the law industry is actually sitting down and reading these things. But they have these massive teams of lawyers that allow you to allow them to have all of the outs for all the different scenarios, or the most probable scenarios. So we've been trained, and we have kind of like Pavlov's dog, right? We've just been trained to hit that button to say accept, to move on and move forward, because it is a friction point. It's that same pop-up as when you land on a website and you're given that welcome code for new users. So it absolutely affects your ability to do those things. But at the end of the day, it's your personal needs. If privacy is super important to you, you're probably not going to use Chrome, right? You're probably going to not accept cookies. Maybe you have a pop-up blocker. And then on the other side of that, there's people who really want that personalized experience. There's people who, there's some package tracking applications out there that will have access to your email, so they can harvest the tracking number and service you all of the things, but they have access to your email. So if they want, and obviously I wouldn't read the terms of service, but they could read through everything and serve you more targeted ads based on whatever is being said in your email, as an example. So there's pros and cons, and you just have to, you as a person, as an end consumer, have to understand what's important to you.
Yeah. All right, quickly, are chatbots helpful?
That's an awesome question. They can be. They definitely can be. I would say, I don't know if this is a specific call out at ours, but ours needs improvement. But I think everybody's needs improvement. I think a lot of times they are built on trying to solve a specific use case released, and then not always necessarily looked as a point of refinement. I think if you look at chat and where it is taking place is really important. Do I have the ability to send you a text message to handle an order? I was just dealing with a website the other day. I ordered something, and then I ordered something again. I said, hey, I made 2 orders. Are you able to wipe off the shipping costs and ship these 2 things together? And they're like, no, I can't do that. But that happened in my iMessage. It didn't happen on a website. So making sure that you have those placements within, say, an order confirmation page. Maybe I have a checkbox so I can have order updates or have communication through text message, or in other countries, maybe that's WhatsApp, etc. So absolutely, but they need to be built to solve your consumer orders. Like, if I can't figure out questions on my orders, you're probably not doing it right to start with, or you're probably not addressing what are your most common issues. And so you have to be able to think through that. As far as product recommendations and pieces like that, for sure, that can happen. But at the end of the day, if you walk into a store, is it a robot giving you that recommendation, or is it a human? People want that human connection and that ability to have a little bit of back and forth play.
Sure. Makes sense. Well, Tom, we're at the end of our time. If folks want to follow along or connect with you or the brand, is there a place where they can go to connect? Maybe the website for starters? Yeah,
for sure. Solomon.com, depending on what country you're in. And you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm definitely there. Spend way too much time scrolling through. It got me hooked.
Well, thank you again for taking the time to chat and share your perspective. Like I mentioned earlier, I think this is a really, really interesting conversation and a lot of takeaways. There's I feel like we opened up some rabbit holes, and we could definitely dive deeper, and you could get really deep into the technical side of it all. But you've spared us some of that stuff. So thank you again.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.